I'm Conor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands.
Hello and welcome to Heavy Hands, the only podcast where you can source professional fight opinions from a bona fide doctor. That's Patrick Wyman, he's my co-host, and I'm Conor Ruebusch, and I'm a bona fide guy. And welcome to Heavy Hands. Today we have a whole mess of things to talk about. UFC Japan happened, and we didn't really talk about it last week, and we're not going to talk about it a lot this week for more or less the same reasons we didn't talk about it much last week. But Ovince St. Preux defeated short notice fill-in Yushin Okami with yet another Von Flue choke, his third in the UFC, and that's got to be some kind of record. Jessica Andrade and Claudia Gadelha had a very compelling fight that probably set the winner, Jessica Andrade, rather, up for either a title shot or a number one contenders fight. Gokhan Saki from K1 made his UFC debut, and other stuff happened. But today we also wanted to take the latter half of our show to talk about how do you want to phrase it, Pat? Some things that are unheralded aspects of fighting success.
Well, just kind of underreported and somewhat amorphous and ambiguous aspects of fighting, I think. Yeah. Things that are hard for us to pin down and quantify, but which nevertheless are really important to understanding how and why things happen in a ring or a cage.
Right. And the two we've chosen to discuss are confidence and ringcraft. These are two sort of amorphous, difficult to define, but obviously very crucial ideas we're going to discuss in the latter half of the show. We're going to talk about their importance to fighting, how they're trained, and examples of fighters who, do or don't have those traits in abundance. Let's kick things off, though, talking about UFC Japan. The Von Preux, Patrick Wyman. The Von Preux strikes again.
Yeah, that was, wow. I mean, I can't say that I expected a whole huge fight, something really awesome to happen there, but it was a little bit surprising that went down as quickly and efficiently as it did, because Yushin Okami, for all of his many flaws as a fighter, and we have known for some years what those flaws really are, has not ever really been a guy who you could submit easily, and especially not with that was his first submission loss. In 45 fights, that was his first submission loss. And to be caught with a Von Flue choke?
Right.
Huh?
So let's talk about the Von Flue, because obviously it's a low percentage technique, and it is thought of as like a white belt submission, like the crossing your feet from back control ankle lock, or there's the Von Flue. It's like getting caught in it to a lot of jiu-jitsu people is like tapping to knee on belly. Like it shouldn't happen. But I think that feeling sort of undermines the impressiveness of what Ovince St. Preux is doing with his Von Preux choke, because he hits it a lot, and it's not an incidental thing. He looks for it. It's not like you made a mistake and held on and so he spied it. He looks for it. It's the move he wants when he goes to the ground. For whatever reason, it's the move he wants. And you can see him setting it up. And I think you got to give him a little credit for that, right? I mean, that's 3 in the UFC. No one else has ever done that.
Yeah. It is not a minor accomplishment. This isn't a thing that he just, as you pointed out, this is not a thing he just kind of grabs out of nowhere. Yeah. This is a technique that he's really good at, and presumably he trains regularly. It perfectly sums up Ovince St. Preux's game to me.
Yes.
In so many ways. And I say this as somebody who generally enjoys what Ovince St. Preux brings to the table. He's just such a weird amalgam of parts that don't really fit together in any meaningful way. He does his best work as a southpaw counterpuncher, but doesn't really do much to set those shots up.
Yep.
He's incredibly fast and athletic, but really not especially efficient and has trouble maintaining a pace. He's a really talented wrestler, but isn't actually that good at it. He is a master of this obscure and rarely seen choke.
It had to be the Von Flue that he specialized in.
Yeah, it's just so random. You remember when this was? I will always remember the Nikita Krylov fight, because the sequence of events perfectly sums up St. Preux as a fighter. This was 3.5 years ago, and yet it still gets to the heart of exactly who and what he is. So he goes high kick, to double leg to Von Flue choke. Like that's, and it really rapid succession. The fight only lasted like 90 seconds. It lasted 89 seconds, that fight did. And St. Preux went from the like high kick directly, like transition into a double leg, and then pretty much as soon as they hit the ground, hit the Von Flue.
Arguably some of the most jarring transitions you could try to force between three such disparate moves.
I know. I mean, but like is Ovent St. Preux ever going to be a champion? No, he's absolutely not going to be a champion. We have seen fairly clearly what the limits of Ovent St. Preux's style are, but he's the kind of dude we're going to look back on when his time in the UFC is done and be like, that motherfucker was really fun.
Yeah, he was interesting. Like there was something going on whenever he was in a fight. And yeah, I like that. Like St. Preux, we talk a lot about flow charts on this show, how certain fighters have technique flow charts. They sort of think their way through these, not necessarily even predetermined, but these logical paths. And St. Preux's techniques exist in a cloud or like a scatter chart rather than a flow chart. He has some very good moves, and he's a phenomenal athlete, and I think he's got really good instincts for fighting as well. So
he's more like a word cloud where you have like associated things that are all kind of exist in these separate categories.
But Von Flue was like really big.
Yeah, well, or like he knows how to do things like go front kick to question mark, like front kick, question mark kick, middle kick, high kick. Like there are all of these techniques that, or like straight left, move the hand, high kick, straight left, move the hands, body kick. Like he knows how to do things like this. It's not like there is no process to what he's doing. It's just that it's so inconsistent and seemingly strange and not necessarily the way that other fighters would do it, that it's kind of hard to get a hold of it. But like, I love him because he's such an incredible physical talent, and the style itself is just so weird. Like nothing but love for Ovent St. Preux, man.
It's sort of we talked a couple weeks ago, we'll move on after this, but we talked a couple weeks ago about we were asked a question in the heavy bag about the utility of like how do you spread out your time training, how do you spread out your focus so you can be the best version of yourself as a fighter. And I think retroactively, it makes a lot of sense to imagine that Ovent St. Preux is a Von Flue specialist and a high kick specialist. Like he spends a lot of time perfecting these techniques that only exist in a very limited space. And so
counter left uppercut specialist.
Right. So his game is limited, but when it gets a chance to work, you have to give the moves respect. You have to give respect to the amount of training that went into them. You could quibble about whether or not it's an efficient use of your training time to put that much time to specialize in a Von Flue choke, but you have to say he clearly has specialized in it. It's not an accident. He knows what he's doing. So credit to him, man. Yushin Okami was not expected to do much coming up a division on short notice and everything, well past his prime, but if it had to end some way, I would happily take another Von Flue choke from OSP over any other kind of result that could have happened. So I was happy with it. But the women's strawweight fight in the co-main event was really the relevance main event of the card in terms of how much it actually means for the sport of MMA and the particular division in which it took place. Gadelha versus Andrade meant a lot. Both of these women have lost in this division before, only to Ioane and Jacek. And both of them were kind of shut out by her in different ways in their last fights with her. And so I think I liked this fight. It's sort of a sorting match to try to figure out where the division's going to go from here, because we need to have this conveyor belt moving to keep feeding new challengers to the champion until the champion turns over and we can mix things up again. But it does look, at least for the time being, that Gadelha's off that conveyor belt for a bit. She's got to step to the side and reevaluate, because Andrade gave her the business. After suffering 3 minutes of beautiful boxing from Gadelha, Andrade basically had the rest of the fight in the bag. How did she do it?
So I think that our instinct last week, because I think you and I kind of danced around this as we were talking about this fight, was we both kind of had a sense that maybe Andrade was a really bad matchup for Gadelha.
Yeah.
But I don't think either of us, and we sussed out some of the implications of that. We talked about pace. We talked about the difficulty of getting under Andrade's hips for takedowns. We talked about how strong her hips are. We talked about Andrade's physicality. We talked about counters. And so like we really talked about a lot of the aspects of this fight, but I don't think either you or I really took it to its logical conclusion, which was that there was a really distinct path for Andrade to just beat the ever-loving shit out of Gedalia.
Yeah, by fighting an Andrade fight. And Jessica Andrade is, as soon as I watched this fight, like, okay, I think you could look at this bout and knowing Gedalia and knowing Andrade, just knowing their styles, that about halfway through the second round, you should have known as an educated fight fan by that point that Gedalia was probably done. It was pretty clear, I think, that she was actually tired after the first round. And
it was when she got up and tried to shoot that god-awful takedown. And there was nothing on it, and she couldn't get low and she couldn't drive, and Andrade just kind of shucked her off.
That's what I said on Twitter. Somebody critiqued me for that. But I said, as soon as I saw Gedalia get in fairly deep on a shot and not be able to finish, I knew she was done. Not that she was going to be finished necessarily, not that she couldn't make something happen, but when you are fighting Jessica Andrade, I think we now have to say that is the reality. She is a sort of benchmark fighter where if you are not smart enough or disciplined enough to stick to the right strategy, if you allow yourself to drift into her kind of fight, very few women, like maybe not even Joanna Jędrzejczyk, can stop her from winning that kind of fight. If Jędrzejczyk had fought Andrade the way Gedalia did this night, she probably would have done significantly better. She's certainly got better stamina. And she probably wouldn't have been content to stay on the ground to grab a rest. She probably would have tried to pop right back up. But even in that fight, Andrade would have had a lot of opportunities to make things happen. And you compare that, Gedalia's performance here in that kind of dynamic, to the fight that Jędrzejczyk did have with Andrade, and you kind of see the key difference. There's a certain way you have to approach a fighter like Andrade, and to me, it is sort of like useful from a promotional or matchmaking perspective because she sort of tests the mental fortitude or the cleverness of her opponents. You have to be a certain level or prepared a certain way to beat her.
Yeah, Andrade is a fighter where you have to focus your game plan on taking away the things that Andrade does well rather than exploiting the openings that she gives you. Because she's going to give you a lot of openings. And John Lineker is the same way. Like, I really think that the two are so close in terms of what they do well and how they approach fights. Yeah. Except Andrade, relative to her competition, is actually way better than Lineker is. Like, she's not as powerful per se, but all the things that Lineker does well, all the ways in which he is a hard stylistic matchup for a lot of fighters, Andrade is more so.
Yeah, like, she couples some of the Lineker vibe with some Khabib vibe. Like, she also has the wrestling and the grappling to throw in there that Lineker doesn't really go to in the same way. Like, he doesn't aggressively pursue those aspects of the game.
She's way more physically gifted than Lineker is, I think. Like, Lineker hits really hard and is incredibly durable, but Andrade is way faster on her feet and has faster hands relative to her competition.
Yeah, and judging how she hung with Gedalia, who most would agree is among the strongest fighters in the division, judging how she hung with her and tossed her around in the clinches, like Gedalia jumps on a guillotine and Andrade uses her neck to fling Gedalia to the ground with force. You get a picture of the kind of strength she has.
Yeah. So to come back to what I was saying, you can't fight somebody like Andrade by exploiting the opportunities that they give you, because they're going to give you a lot of them. And if you think you're exploiting an opportunity, you are still giving Andrade the kind of fight that she wants.
Yes.
If you are consenting to exchange with her, if you're consenting to throw combinations with her, if you're consenting to that pace and you're consenting to her pressuring you back and letting you stand your ground and throw back at her, that is still her fight. That doesn't mean you're not going to hit her. It doesn't mean you're not going to win exchanges. It doesn't mean you're not going to win rounds. But that is not the kind of fight that's going to favor you over the long run, because she's apparently not going to get tired. She's incredibly durable and hard to knock out at 115 pounds. How are you going to – that just does not behoove you in the long run to fight that kind of fight, even if you are successful in the moment with it.
Yeah.
The way Jędrzejczyk fought her was by denying Andrade opportunities.
Yes.
She is like, okay, I'm going to take away the things that you do well. I'm going to take away your pressure. I'm going to take away your range. I'm going to take away your combinations and force you to go one or two shots at a time. And in that kind of fight, there was no way that she was going to beat somebody who was 5 inches taller, had the footwork, had the defensive wrestling, had the clinch, had all of the tools necessary to make that happen, and the discipline to just stick to that.
Yeah, I totally agree. The reason that Andrade is that kind of opponent, we've spoken of several fighters like this. Kovalev was one example, Sergey Kovalev. But Andrade is definitely a snowball kind of fighter where you have to deny her the opportunities because few fighters take advantage of a single opportunity as enthusiastically as Andrade does. It didn't take many clear mistakes from Gadelha. It didn't take Andrade getting inside and failing a few times for her to start taking over that fight. The first round was essentially two different fights, where Gadelha was lighting Andrade up on the way in, showing off her still improving boxing and looking pretty good doing it on a technical level, but strategically, Andrade had one opportunity and suddenly the rest of the fight, like from the last 2 minutes of the first round through the rest of the bout, it was mostly Andrade capitalizing on what she had been allowed to do. You allow her to do something, you allow her to have some success, she is going to keep building on it. And once she starts building on it, you've already agreed to a fight in which you have to put your strength against her strength, your stamina against her stamina, your confidence against her confidence. And not even Claudia Gadelha can match that. Like physically, not even Claudia Gadelha can stand up to that.
Because if you look at the number and type of shots that Gadelha was landing over those first 3 minutes, those against any other fighter, you extrapolate those out to the whole fight. Like I don't think Gadelha could have maintained that pace, but like slow it down just a little bit, and that's enough to win a comfortable decision against most fighters. But against Andrade, if you're throwing say 15 strikes a minute, that means that you're giving Andrade the opportunity for the most part, unless you're doing exactly what Ioana Jędrzejczyk did and sticking her on the very end of a long reach. If you're throwing 15 strikes a minute as Claudia Gadelha, you're giving Andrade the opportunity to throw 30. So I suggest if you want to take another look at this fight, just to appreciate the sheer nutso pace that Andrade is capable of pushing, go back and count the number of strikes she threw per minute on the feet. When she wasn't wrestling, when they were just striking, she was throwing 30 or 40 strikes a minute.
Yeah, and at the beginning, getting the worst of the exchanges, like missing mostly and taking a lot of clean shots. But the pace is what matters. Like that's the thing is the difference between Andrade and another fighter. We'll talk about this more, I imagine, when we get to our confidence section. But Andrade is like her pace is she doesn't. Okay, here's a great way of saying it. Somebody said this about Rocky Marciano. Rocky Marciano said this about someone else. I can't remember. My brain is fried. But she doesn't get discouraged when she misses at all. She is not throwing punches with the intent of landing one punch. She does not throw a right hand with the intent of landing that right hand in the same way that other fighters do. She throws that right hand because in some way Andrade knows, she clearly knows on some level that she needs to push a certain pace to beat her opponents. And it doesn't matter if the right hand lands. What matters is she throws that right hand and the 4 punches that flow off of it 5 times per round, or she's not fighting fast enough and hard enough. And that kind of thing makes a huge difference because Gadelha, you clearly landed the better shots in those early exchanges, was clearly sharper and more technical, but the only way she could land those shots was to match Andrade's pace. And so in a weird way, Andrade won those exchanges in the big picture while losing every single one of them because they were not the kind of exchanges Gadelha needed to be having.
Yeah, it's like Andrade, for some reason I think it's her freakish physicality. She has an unbelievably strong core. Like I think she has about the strongest core I've ever seen on a fighter because the way that she throws her punches, these combinations of hooks, there's no arm to them really at all. Like
it's just like a right angled elbow. The arm doesn't bend or move. It's just like spinning back and forth.
Yeah, basically. I mean, and that's not bad technique. It's everything that is being driven from her hips and her core.
Rigid, like, man. The punches are rigid. Like there is a ton of mass and tight structure behind every shot.
Exactly. And that's good technique is what that is. Yeah. And that's because her shoulders aren't getting tired. Her arms aren't getting tired because it's all core. It's all hip. It's all leg. It's all these big, strong muscle groups. And she's just torquing into every single one of them. So she doesn't have to like throw everything into every single shot for them to be really hard, forceful shots, and they don't take a ton of energy because that's an efficient way to throw a punch is with your core and your legs and your hips behind them all working in one seamless unit. Like that doesn't take that much energy. You can do that. Like if you like go to a heavy bag and practice really like throwing a hard punch. Like you've got in your head what a hard punch feels like, and then practice just torquing, just getting everything to work together, and notice how much less energy it takes to throw those really nice flowing torquing shots with that still have a lot of force behind them. They may not be as hard as you can possibly throw, but they're still really, really powerful, and they're much more efficient, and you can do a lot of it.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with that. But boy, I never used to. People said that it sounds like twerk when we say torque, and I never heard it before. But I must admit, I had to laugh to myself when he said that Andrade didn't get tired because she just twerks her way in. It's like, yeah, that was a successful technique. That's about 20 minutes. Why don't we take a break, actually, before we get to our next fight? There's one more bout, one more fighter in particular, actually, we want to talk about from this card. That's Gokhan Saki. He made his debut with a spectacular one-round war with Frank Waston, Enrique da Silva. We'll talk about that and then give you some of our thoughts on the sport of kickboxing and answer some of the listener questions from listeners who've asked why we don't cover more kickboxing on this show. We'll talk about all of that, as well as confidence and ringcraft after this break.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
And we are back. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Gokhan Saki, whose name I'm sure all of us in the MMA community are mispronouncing. It's probably like Gukhan, right?
Probably, yeah.
Gokhan Saki?
Because does the O's have umlauts?
It has an umlaut, yeah.
Yeah, so it should be Gukhan, I guess.
Gukhan?
Like let's just go with Gokhan, man.
Gokhan Saki made his UFC debut at UFC Japan. It was kind of an oddball scheduling. You know, it was like not an MMA fighter making his big debut, but a weird sort of freak show thing with a guy crossing over from another sport. It had that kind of strange appeal, so I thought it was perfect to put him on a Japan card, even if the card itself was not great. His fight was probably the best one on the card in terms of just pure action delivered in a small amount of time. 4 minutes, 45 seconds, knockout with a two-punch combination. After gassing and getting beaten up a little bit, Saki, I think, made sure that the three people who watched this card will remember his name, although they may not pronounce it correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I have been a fan of Gokhan Saki for a very long time, going back to when he was fighting in K1. Back when the K1 World Grand Prix was still a thing, like back when their K1 heavyweights were the crowning glory of every kickboxing year, like the end of kickboxing's last golden age. I loved Gokhan Saki back then, and have some very fond memories of his fights back in the day with guys like Alistair Overeem. Remember, like the fight that he had with who's the big Romanian dude?
Big Romanian dude, Daniel Guida?
Yes, the fight that he had with Daniel Guida at the 2010 World Grand Prix is one of my all-time favorite fights, regardless of combat sports. And then after that, because it's a one-night tournament, Saki goes out and has gives it his all with, I think, probably broken ribs in a fight with Alistair Overeem. On Overeem's way to winning that K1 World Grand Prix title. Like that's one of my very favorite 2-fight runs in all combat sports. I've loved Saki for a long time. It was nice to see him come out here and put on like a vintage Saki performance in an MMA fight. It was like this was who Gokhan Saki is. He's incredible, an incredible talent. It was great to see him get that knockout.
Yeah, I was forced to make the tired joke as soon as the fight had happened, or as soon as he stopped the first takedown. I said, did Gokhan Saki have 6 weeks of sprawl training or what? 6 months of sprawl training? But he looked really good, and then he had octagon jitters, which I think he did anyway. And I do think that's kind of surprising. It's kind of interesting how somebody with as much ridiculously tough, like Gokhan Saki has been in some hard fights as a kickboxer, but changing the rule set, even against someone who was not a great takedown artist, like if you're going to give Gokhan Saki someone whose takedowns he has to defend, Frank Waston's a pretty decent choice, then he still got tired doing it. He couldn't keep it up. And I have to assume that's a one-time thing. I don't think it presages any long-term issues with Saki's stamina, but I do think it's interesting that somebody like Saki can still experience the notorious octagon jitters.
Yeah, that's true. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, no, you made a good point. What do you? I mean, I think in a division that's this thin, like you can have some really fun fights with Gokhan Saki.
Oh yeah.
I would love to see him fight John Vellante.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to see that too. Basically, like or Gokhan Saki versus Steve Bosse, or Gokhan Saki versus. Shit, I wish Nikita Krylov was back.
I wish Fabio Maldonado was still in the UFC.
Oh my God. Maldonado Saki would be disgusting in the best way possible. Yeah, like we still, the thing is, we still don't really know anything about Gokhan Saki's grappling. We don't know a bunch about his wrestling, but he had sort of the Mark Hunt approach going on. Like he has a stocky, stuff the shot, take an angle, and get out approach that I think works for somebody who is just now picking up these techniques. And then as far as if his stamina is not an issue, as far as his techniques of his kickboxing, he's obviously much better than most of his competition. Even with the addition of takedowns, he was flowing here with his punches, his kicks. He looked really smooth. And then, you know, Frank Waston is Frank Waston. So as soon as Saki started showing signs of slowing down, he was all over him. But he also came back and knocked him out. So it was a fun fucking fight. It was kind of like a Brown Arlovsky type of deal where it was just a crazy round that was somehow more memorable than anything else in the card, despite only lasting 4 minutes.
It was a round of the year candidate. It was up there. It was really good.
Yeah, it was very fun. About kickboxing. Obviously, we both admitted that we liked Gokhan Saki. It was hard for us to admit. At least for me it was. You know, I'm a little ashamed. But I do like kickboxers. And you like kickboxers. And yet we hardly ever talk about kickboxers or kickboxing or kick fighting, to use the more broad term to encompass things like Muay Thai, on this show. And some people brought that up after last week's episode. They're like, how come you guys never talk about this? You talk about every time, like, oh, a great high-level kickboxer's coming into MMA or whatever, but we never talk about their fights. We don't keep up with it. Why is that?
Okay, so there are a few different reasons, I would say, and some of them have to do with the sport itself. I think more in your case than mine, and like what actually happens in the ring. In my case, it's more because, A, nobody watches it. Like the U.S. audience for kickboxing, and most of our audience for heavy hands as a U.S. audience, is minuscule. And it crosses over in large part with MMA anyway. There just really is not an audience to talk about it. And, you know, Glory tried. Glory has been trying and sunk a lot of money into trying to develop a U.S. market for kickboxing. And that market just does not exist. So there's that. Also, it's really hard to follow what happens in kickboxing. It is not well covered by any sort of media, in large part because there's basically no audience for it in the United States.
The record keeping is terrible. Everything is on a tape delay. every important card, there'll be like a card with like 5 heavyweight superstars, and it's in like Romania at like 4:30 in the morning for us. Like, it's not easy to follow being an American in general.
There was a time a few years ago when I really tried hard to keep up on it, and I just couldn't do it. I gave it everything I had for about 3 months in terms of trying to keep up with it. Mm-hmm. I did a couple of shows with Stephen Wright, friend of the show, back then on his podcast, mm-hmm. and I couldn't keep up with it. Like, there was too much stuff. It was too hard, literally, for me to keep up on everything that was happening in there.
We should shout out Stephen, by the way, for fans who listen to the show and are disappointed that we don't talk more kickboxing. The Warman's Kickfighting Podcast. Stephen the Warman Wright is very good, and he really, really follows kickboxing and really knows the sport and the techniques very well.
Yeah, so if you want, the man is an encyclopedia of striking knowledge. He has like an eidetic memory for all of these things. So follow him if you're interested in it. He used to coach Johnny Hendricks in kickboxing. He's coached a whole bunch of other UFC level fighters. He coaches Jin Frey, doesn't he? The Invicta atomweight.
Yes, I'm not sure.
He coaches a lot of very good fighters. He's a really, really good kickboxing coach.
Yeah,
but at any rate, leaving that aside, it's hard to do it. But so I think both you and I, Connor, instead of following kickboxing as a sport, I think we follow individual kickboxers whom we tend to enjoy a very great deal.
Yes. Yeah. And there's also, like, it's not just us. Some of it admittedly is that there is not much of an audience for kickboxing. The people who, like, American fans who really like kickboxing really like it. But that's because most people who might be fans kind of wash out, probably because it's difficult to follow. It's difficult to really get invested in the same way you can with more visible combat sports. But also for me, I find the even Muay Thai is weirdly limited. My big problem with Muay Thai is how it's judged. I'm the worst Muay Thai judge in the world, and I know some people will laugh at that because some people think I'm the worst anything judge in the world. But I always get Muay Thai bouts wrong because I don't understand how they judge them so differently from how I think fights should be scored. But that creates a certain kind of style. And likewise, there are certain things that create a certain kind of style in international kickboxing. And I think everyone would agree the predominant style is Dutch kickboxing. And most of the other styles are sort of accessory to the ideas present in Dutch kickboxing. And I don't think it's because Dutch kickboxing is the only way to make that rule set, like, is the only way to consistently win in that rule set. There are obviously fighters with a wide variety of styles, but the predominant one is that Dutch kickboxing style. And to part the shades here and be a little honest, I don't really like it. I don't like watching Dutch kickboxing stylistically that much. Like, walk in, you don't really jab your way in. You both meet about 2 feet apart with your gloves high, and one of you tries to land 3 punches in a low kick, and the other guy tries to stop all of them, and he tries to do the same thing. And whoever does it harder and meaner often wins. And this is, to me, it's obviously oversimplistic, but you can see these trends even at the highest level of kickboxing. Even guys like Robin van Roosmalen have that sort of style, and it's just not as pleasant to watch to me as the stuff I find in MMA and boxing.
Well, so I think in general, kickboxing fights, because there is a basic agreed upon set of best practices, whether you associate that with the Dutch style or not, and I think it's fair to associate it with the Dutch style, is that there are a lot of things that just everybody does that everybody throws 2-3 low kick. Everybody does that. That's because it's a combination that works within the confines of the rule set. The international kickboxing rule set lends itself to throwing a lot of volume. You need to throw a lot of volume. You need to throw 30, 40 strikes a minute. The way to do that is by hitting these rope combinations and by drilling these things over and over and over again, so that when somebody throws this at you, you throw this back at them. And it's there are organic strikers in international kickboxing, but you also have to do a lot of really rote stuff. So a lot of the fights tend to end up looking fairly similar, with a similar volume of strikes thrown and landed that are basically the same combinations. They tend to be contested at pretty much the same ranges, like at kind of outside striking range into the pocket, and that's about it. I don't know. I think I think your criticism is a fair one. That doesn't bother me so much because I spent years doing that and training under Dutch stylists. So I'm used to drilling those combinations over and over again in partner drills and on the pads and hitting them in sparring. But I can see how if that were not your thing, it would not be that appealing to watch.
I think it might, whereas Muay Thai, the style that you see in Muay Thai, there is sort of a defined Muay Thai style in the way that there is a defined Dutch kickboxing style. And maybe that's why I don't follow them as much too. I can't, and maybe it's just because I don't know enough about them. But I do get the impression from both those sports that there is a certain, as you said, a set of best practices, a certain way of approaching fights that most competitors agree upon. And that is not the case in MMA or boxing at all. You have a huge variety of styles in both of those sports from all around the world. And each of them is pretty visible. Each one has a few representatives that really make that style stand out. Whereas it's hard for me off the top of my head to think of who is the slickster counterpuncher in the Dutch kickboxing world.
Oh, I mean, they do exist. Of course. It's just it is almost, and this comes back to the structure of the sport, it's almost impossible for us to get the depth of knowledge necessary to be able to point to these people.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say, I think maybe the structure of the sport, as in Muay Thai, the judging and the betting influences the style there. I think the structure of the fights probably has an impact on international kickboxing. The glory rule set is 3x3, which I think really, really places an emphasis on throwing a lot of, it kind of makes it like amateur boxing. You have a short fight with short rounds, so you can afford to burn a lot of energy. And that sounds like a lot of fun to some people, and it is a lot of fun to some people. But to me, I really like fights that strike the right balance between like the interplay of playing a complex strategy and going to war and having violence. And if you think of like combat sports, and we're mostly talking about ones in which people hit each other in the face. If you think about striking combat sports as a spectrum, I think MMA is like right in the middle, where you have enough shit that people have to worry about that you get a lot of mistakes. And so you get exciting things happening. People get punished for doing things wrong on a regular basis. MMA has a lot of knockouts, a lot of submissions, a lot of knockdowns, scrambles, etc. But you also have a wide variety of styles, all fairly equally represented. And you have a structure of fighting in which people can afford to go into bouts and take a little time and figure their opponents out. And so you see a little more control and care, more ringcraft. And then boxing is on the far upward end of the ringcraft spectrum. Lots of ringcraft, comparatively fewer brawls, especially at the elite level, because brawls happen when you screw up. Whereas kickboxing is at the far end of the spectrum. To me, not as much control or depth of technique or strategy, but a lot of action. And I can certainly see why people want us to talk about it. But for whatever reason, it just never really gets its hooks in me as a sport. There are fighters I like. There are fighters I like a lot. Gokhan Saki being one of them, but also, kickboxers like Put Lorlek, Muay Thai fighter Put Lorlek. I love watching his fights. Who are some guys that you like watching? Just to shout out a few names.
Nikki Holtzkin.
Of course, Nikki
Holtzkin has been my favorite for a very long time. I've always enjoyed Giorgio Petrosian.
Love Petrosian.
I like Robin Van Roosmalen a lot.
Yeah. I mean, there are guys that stand out, but for whatever reason, the sport doesn't get its hooks into either of us. And I don't think that's probably not going to change dramatically anytime soon, but we can make an effort to talk about a big name kickboxer we both like when the opportunity arises in the future.
Yeah. But anyway, we spent a long time talking about kickboxing. Neither you nor I is going to turn on kickboxing and be like, oh, I hate this.
No.
It being a thing that you want to talk about at great length on your show about combat sports is not the same thing as there being fighters that you enjoy from time to time. I enjoy baseball, but not enough to want to talk about it on my podcast. I enjoy football, but not enough to want to talk about it on a podcast. Like, you can enjoy something and draw inspiration from it and think about it hard without it being a thing that you feel the need to discuss in great depth and break down.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of football, I do want listeners to take note of the fact that I deliberately did not ask Pat and myself to stand for the national anthem at the start of this episode, which I usually do. So consider that a protest. We wanted to talk about underappreciated, unheralded, too complex, nebulous aspects of fighting skill and craft. And the first one of those we wanted to talk about was confidence. Confidence is huge in fights. We talk about confidence a lot on this show, actually, and I think you and I both talk about it a lot in lots of other, pieces we write and podcasts we guest on or whatever. Confidence matters. And I think anybody watching a fight can tell. Like, it's one of the most visible things. A turning point in a fight almost always happens, like a major turning point happens when someone's confidence has been broken in some way. And fans can see that. That stuff matters. It's very visible. And opponents can see it too. And so we want to talk a little bit about the good of confidence, the risks of being overconfident, and how do you manage your level of confidence, and where does it come from, right? So like combat sports and how interesting I find them, I think confidence is sort of a spectrum where every fighter sits, it's somewhere from zero confidence to outrageous God confidence, God complex. And then every fighter sits somewhere on that scale, but every fighter also has 2 points, I think, where they have their real confidence and their perceived confidence, the confidence perceived in them by their opponents, the judges, or whatever. And fighters differ very widely. How the distance between those 2 points on the scale differs a lot from one fighter to the next. Some fighters have very low confidence, but they seem to be very confident. Some fighters have very high confidence, but it doesn't come through. And you have all sorts of different permutations of that relationship between real and perceived confidence. we have some examples, right? What are some examples of what's an example of somebody who seems to be a very confident fighter?
So I think Conor McGregor is probably the best example of a confident fighter. I think Jessica Andrade, whom we just spent a whole lot of time talking about, is an extremely confident fighter.
For sure.
Joanna Jędrzejczyk is a confident fighter. At the highest level, to be an elite fighter, you have to be confident. There is no other way around it.
I think you have to be confident. There's a certain benchmark that you have to be confident to a degree to fight at all, right? If you have no confidence in yourself, you can't fight. But you can fight. Some fighters do quite well with a shockingly low level of self-confidence. And for those, you would also like the polar opposite of somebody like Jessica Andrade, who I think is just unshakable confidence. We saw that in her fight with Jędrzejczyk and also in her fight with Gadelha. But then you have fighters like Alistair Overeem, like Vitor Belfort, like Uriah Hall, fighters whose confidence is notably shaky. But even those guys, we shouldn't make the mistake of implying that those guys have no confidence. They have to be confident enough to step into the cage, to go into the gym and spar several times a week, to work that hard, to put up with the difficulty of being a fighter. You have to be confident. It's a matter of how much real confidence you have versus how much are you able to fake it, to bluff your way through, and also how much does your style suit the level of confidence you come into the ring with.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there are, not everybody's confidence is going to manifest itself the same way, but to be able to throw the kinds of things that you need to throw, to pull off the kinds of things you need to pull off, you need to believe that it's going to work. Mm-hmm. That is why confidence matters. You can know how to do everything, but if you can't pull the trigger for whatever reason, whether it's your reflexes are slowing down, whether you see the opportunities and just can't do it, or most importantly, whether it's confidence, your belief that you can pull off this thing that you know you have to do in that moment, it is one of the most important things in fighting. It's something that it's really hard for us to quantify. It's really hard for us to wrap our heads around, but nevertheless, it is really important. And studying a couple of cases of fighters and their confidence can help us to really understand how and why it functions the way it does. So I think McGregor is a great example of this, because when he is on, my God, like the confidence and the ability to pull off whatever he needs to pull off is shocking. But at the same time, he's kind of balanced on a knife edge. And in all of his losses, we've seen the break. We've seen the break in his confidence happen so clearly, and it's usually connected to a break in his stamina. And at that point, then all bets are off. And you pretty much can tell, like, okay, the fight is probably going to be over at roughly this time.
Yeah, you can. McGregor is a great example of somebody he can go from looking like Aldo or Andrade to looking like Overeem in an instant. Whereas Overeem never hits that level of extreme confidence in the same way that McGregor does. He has the same weakness, but he never hits that same peak, at least of perceived confidence. Do you have a theory as to why that is? Like, what's the difference between a McGregor and an Overeem? What's the difference between the way their confidence does or does not show up in their fights, or what it takes to break them, to rob them of that confidence?
So in Overeem's case, I think it's the fact that he knows and has known for so long exactly where the problems are.
Yeah.
And so I had lunch with Greg Jackson back last December, and we talked about Alistair Overeem. We talked about him quite a bit, and he's like, look, Alistair isn't a dummy. Like, he knew that he couldn't keep fighting the way that he was fighting. He knew that he needed to do other things to adjust his style to his weaknesses. And they worked together to kind of develop that new style that was going to help mask what some of those weaknesses were. But the confidence piece was really interesting, because Overeem drew confidence. It was still a confident fighter at his best with that new style, but it was a different kind of confidence, right? It was a different, and we talked about this a fair bit, that instead of it being that I'm going to march you down and physically dominate you with my power and my size and my strength in the clinch, it was by being faster and slicker than you, I'm bullying you. I'm the confident one in this particular exchange. I'm going to take this away from you.
He decided to stop being a mugger in favor of becoming a YouTube commenter. Like, I'm not gonna have to confront you. I'm just gonna fuck with you. That's what his new style became.
Exactly.
Yeah, but so the thing is does that exhibit a kind of confidence to be able to be confident enough to change your style? Is there a way in which we could say Overeem has a kind of confidence that somebody like Conor McGregor maybe doesn't? Because I think you could say that Conor McGregor maybe doesn't have the confidence to question himself enough, that maybe he doesn't always grow in the way he should grow, or maybe he doesn't look as prepared as he should be for certain challenges because he's not reevaluating in the way that somebody like Overeem is. Overeem, whose in-cage confidence is nowhere close to McGregor's, but who can question himself that to the degree that he can come up with a very serviceable Band-Aid for that problem.
I would say the exact opposite. I would say that what makes McGregor a great fighter is his his confidence in himself to make those changes. Because I think there is no better McGregor than the one who's just lost and who is honestly analyzing himself.
That's true.
And taking himself apart. It's the guy that we saw at the press conference after the first Nate Diaz fight, the guy that we saw in the ring after the Floyd fight. I thought that like a guy who can understand, maybe less so the Floyd fight, I think because he and pretty clearly his team did not actually understand the challenge that they were up against. So like they literally did not have the set of knowledge necessary to evaluate. But in the case I think of the first Diaz fight, which to me will always be the defining moment in McGregor's career and how he responded to that. Like they realized what the problem was. And to beat Diaz the second time, McGregor had to fight against type. He hit the breaking point in that fight, but then realized like, oh no, I have this boxing to fall back on. I can stick and move.
Yes.
I can get my breath back. I can make Diaz chase. I can, like that to me was the point where all of that confidence shone through so clearly.
That's a very good point. And so then I wonder, can we assess confidence in the same way we assess chin? If a key moment in a fight is when the confidence is broken, just like a key moment in a fight would be when a fighter's chin is cracked and they are physically hurt. Are there some, like every chin can be cracked. Some people have never been knocked out, but we know in the whole picture of things, every chin can be cracked. Every single person can be knocked out with a punch if the right punch lands at the right time, at the right spot, whatever. Is confidence the same way? Can Andrade's confidence be broken, but it would take a very, very unique set of skills or physical body to do that? Why does McGregor break the same way as Overeem, but doesn't look like Overeem up to that point at all, and certainly doesn't break as easily? Is it like having a better chin than Overeem, basically?
I think this is one of those unanswerable things. I think it's why somebody is confident or why somebody isn't confident. Like the psychology of a fighter and in ring or in cage psychology is an incredibly complex thing, and we don't have the information. We don't know why somebody may be feeling it on one day or maybe they're not. Maybe they're on some great new gear. Maybe seriously, I think that's a huge factor. Like
it's usually why I feel good.
Yeah, I mean that's maybe maybe you've got some great new PEDs and that's why you feel maybe that's why you're really feeling it. Think about Vitor, like TRT Tour. Have you ever seen a more confident fighter than the TRT version of Vitor Belfort?
Nope. And I remember Bloody Elbows Eugene Robinson talking about that and saying that people were crazy for thinking that there was no effect on Vitor's confidence from the TRT. In my opinion, I think the confidence Vitor garnered from the testosterone was more important than the physical advantages.
Way more.
Absolutely. I don't think he's lost a lot of speed or power. He doesn't look greatly diminished in terms of what he's able to do, even though obviously he's dad bod Vitor now. The neural paths are still there. The explosion is still there. The timing is mostly still there. In the Marquardt fight, we still saw a lot of speed and power and accuracy from Belfort. The difference is that when he was on TRT, he was insanely confident. He was so sure that he could bring all of those weapons to bear and that he wouldn't get put away doing it. He wouldn't get tired. He was just going to keep plugging away until he made it work. And he's not that guy anymore, and he wasn't that guy before TRT. So I think you have to say that obviously that confidence matters, but also that like maybe that's part of why PEDs are so useful. It's not the physical thing necessarily. It's almost a placebo effect. There is genuinely a hormonal effect, feeling more confident when you have higher testosterone. But the mental side of steroids may in fact be a much bigger edge, understanding how important confidence is to a fighter than the physical side. Why don't we take a quick break? When we come back, I want to talk about the ways that we can get into. I asked the whys. We couldn't come up with a concrete answer, but we can talk about some ways that we know that fighters do train confidence, and maybe speculate on some ways in which it can be trained. The way in which it is very different from chin, that you can train confidence and prune and manicure it into something that suits your style. And then after that, we are going to basically give the same treatment, probably a little shorter, to the art of ringcraft, cagecraft, however you want to call it. We'll get to those after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
And we are back. We were talking about confidence. We're going to talk about ringcraft as well. Both of these sort of misunderstood and difficult to define aspects of fighting that are no less important to the success of fighters. Confidence is something that can be trained. We have talked to coaches in the past, both of us, Pat, who have talked about getting their fighters to peak in a training camp, and I believe we've discussed that on the show before. But have you ever heard of any specific methods that trainers use to get their fighters to peak, or do you have any experiences from your own training in which you were made to feel very confident by a particular kind of exercise?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to have a coach telling you, like, yes, this is working. Yes, this is working.
Sure.
And so one of the things that I loved about the Brazilian coaches that I had for kickboxing, and I experienced this in working with the coach I had for the longest time, and I experienced it watching Rafael Cordeiro teach and train too, is always positive reinforcement. Like, I love it when a guy lands a low kick and everybody screams, "Hey!"
Hey, yeah.
That is literal positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
But it's important to do that in training, and guys like Cordero really do that. They're when somebody does something good, you make them feel good about it. You associate that with positivity.
That's a great
Cordero.
point.
Yeah. So Cordero has built the whole theory of coaching on this, which is that he doesn't talk about what the opponent's doing. He talks about what his fighter's doing, what's within their control. And the way he put this to me this was right after Verdum fought Mark Hunt. And Cordero said to me, I don't need to tell Verdum that Mark Hunt has heavy hands. He knows he has heavy hands. He felt him hit him. But Fabricio can't control that. What he can control is what he does about it, and he can control things that are going to lead to Mark Hunt having a bad outcome, basically.
That's like when I did I bring this up a lot. I probably seem like a very bitter man, but I do still remember when I did my Vitor Belfort beating Chris Weidman piece. I was like, here's how he can do it. And I got several complaints from people who said, you didn't mention the takedowns at all. And I was like, well, if I'm game planning for Chris Weidman, I don't need to tell, or for Vitor Belfort, I don't need to tell him don't get taken down by Chris Weidman. If I were his coach and I said that, it would probably hurt him more than it would help him, because he knows, he gets it.
Yeah, this is everybody is aware of these things.
Yeah.
But leaving that aside, there are a lot of different ways to instill confidence in your fighters. I think Cordero's is one that has historically worked really well for him, and it's had good results for him.
Mm-hmm. Greg Jackson
has a variety of ways of instilling confidence in his fighters, that he kind of tailors to their own particular psychological makeup and their own particular situation.
And he does that kind of stuff like Cordero does as well. He's well known as a cheerleader from the side of the cage. Both, I think, to influence the judges a bit, if he can, but also to let his fighter know, they're doing well, they're fighting to the game plan, things are working. Even if they don't feel themselves landing every strike clean, even if it's tough, they hear a loud cheer from a voice that they clearly recognize every single time they do something that works. And I think something I've noticed, too, about, I think positive reinforcement is a really big thing. That's why I think, supervised sparring is really important. For fighters, much more so than there's definitely value in doing large group sparring just to kind of work things out, stay warm, try things. But especially in preparation for a contest, it's got to be individualized sparring. And a big part of that, I think, is you will hear commentators talk about how trainers try to get their fighters to know their voices. But I also know trainers who specifically have like a specific way of congratulating their fighters for doing well. Like they'll pick one word that their fighter knows means they did it correctly. In Muay Thai, you hear the "oe," but I also know boxing trainers who say yes. When something works, they say yes, yes. And it's the only word they use from ringside to tell their fighter that something is working. And I think that kind of thing has an effect. Like you have, it's sort of a Pavlovian response. Like, you know, your confidence gets kicked up when you hear that in the fight, because every single time you've done something good in training, you've heard that same word from the same voice in the same exact situations. It makes the fight more like training. And training is when it's easy to be confident. It's hard as hell to be confident in a fight. But if you can bring that training confidence into the fight, that's one way of doing it, I think, is carrying over that voice recognition, that positive reinforcement, that focus on what you're doing rather than what the opponent is doing. I also want to talk a little bit about training specifically for opponents to produce confidence. I'm just going to mention this very briefly, but I know that there's a certain way of structuring your sparring sessions so that you can feel confident. I know boxing trainers who will send somebody in against basically a worse version of the guy that they didn't do well in sparring last week. They went and sparred a guy who's like a big name in their local gym, or he came and visited from another neighboring gym, and they got beaten up. And so the coach will say, here's a guy who's kind of similar, but he's not as good, he's not as polished. You're going to beat him for the rest of the week, and next week we'll try the good guy again. And if you can do that kind of stuff in a training camp, you can imagine how that builds your confidence. It also shows, I think, the value of confidence, because there's not a lot that changes technically from in a 2-week span. But getting 3 sparring sessions with a worse version of the guy you want to compete with is enough to allow you to compete with him like you couldn't before. And it's just because of the confidence you get from having seen those moves with a little less threat.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. But okay, so let's move on. We're going to talk real quick about Ringcraft.
Yeah. Ringcraft. What is it?
It's about where in the ring or the cage is the fight taking place, and what tools do you use to pick and choose where in the ring or the cage the fight is taking place.
Sure. The idea is to control the cage, to put yourself in a position where you are at an advantage. It is the combat sports version of gaining the higher ground. That's the idea of Ringcraft then. What are some examples, like we did for confidence, of fighters who possess very good Ringcraft, and then we can very quickly run through the specifics of why we say that about them.
Okay, so I think Joanna Jędrzejczyk is the very best example of this in present-day MMA.
Yeah.
I think that she has exceptionally versatile Ringcraft, and that she understands she understands how to pressure, she understands how to stand her ground and work the pocket, and she understands how to stick and move and fight off her back foot. Mm-hmm. So she has the ability to understand in what particular situation is a particular kind of forward movement, backwards movement, lateral movement. How does that play in? She has done it in both big cages and small cages. I think she has all the tools necessary to do it, and the broader understanding of why she does the things that she does in terms of positioning in the cage at various points in time. I think she has the most highly developed and versatile sense of Ringcraft.
Yeah, and to me, like, Ringcraft is very tied into confidence. Like, the effect of or perhaps both of them are tied into discipline. To have good Ringcraft, you have to be a disciplined fighter. You have to be able to stick to, like, you have to know the pros and cons of each position you create or are forced into in the cage, and you need to have the correct discipline to either use it or to reset and find a position that suits the kind of Ringcraft you're going to use for that fight. Jędrzejczyk has that no matter how she's using her Ringcraft, no matter how she's controlling the fight, or, as in the case of the Andrade, like arguably preventing her opponent from controlling the fight, whether she's nullifying or going after somebody. She does manage the cage extremely well. I would say Demetrius Johnson is another fighter who belongs in that category.
He might actually be the best. He might actually be better than Joanna Jędrzejczyk. I think he actually is the best.
He's up there for sure. Somebody who is extremely good at just knowing what to do in each position of the cage, and also forcing the opponents into the positions that don't suit them. Examples of...
I want to, quick, I want to take one step back, because this is something that we talk about a fair bit, but I think we kind of take for granted the basic underlying thing here, which is that by controlling the space of the cage, you get to dictate things like pace and distance and where your opponent moves or doesn't move. So and this is even more true in a cage than it is in a ring, because the fence is a hard barrier and the ropes of a ring are not. Mm-hmm. So if you get backed up to the cage, there's nowhere for you to go. if you have your back to the fence, there's nowhere for you to lean back. You can't avoid shots. It's hard for you to get off, to get back to open space, because your opponent knows right where you are. So your opponent can dictate the range. Your opponent can move in. Your opponent can move out. It's hard for you to hit your opponent because your opponent has all that space at their back and to their sides to move to avoid your shot. And your opponent knows exactly where your head is and exactly where your body is. Your opponent can mix together strikes, takedowns, etc. That's really important. So avoiding the cage or avoiding the fence or not avoiding the fence, to me, that is the central thing that a fighter in an MMA fight in a cage has to worry about, is where does this take place? How do I make sure that if I want to back my opponent up, how do I do that? If I want to avoid being backed up, how do I do that? If I want the open space, because generally I'm the faster fighter or it's better suited to my skills, how do I make sure that I stick in the open space? Those, to me, everything else flows from that from those basic principles. Every single other thing about a fight, whether it's takedowns, not takedowns, whether it's strikes, not strikes, clinch, not clinch, how those things flow together, everything else is predicated on where in the cage the fight takes place.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think we don't talk about this a lot on the show because it's difficult to illustrate without visual aids. But Ringcraft does, like, it funnels down in specificity how you can talk about Ringcraft, like whether your opponent's against the cage, you are against the cage, or you are in center of the cage. Like, those are basically the three positions, broadly speaking, that you will try to pursue or try to put your opponent in for whatever, style matchup you're faced with. But there are also ways in which fighters exhibit their control on a tactical level as well. Ringcraft is not just about putting the opponent in a strategic position where they are at a disadvantage, but also about creating openings using positioning. And that is the kind of stuff I think that Joanna Jędrzejczyk does very, very well, is when she's pressuring, she will give an opponent one angle out and not the other, because she has something ready for them for that angle, and she wants to make it easier to time them and catch them with that corralling shot. If she's back up against the cage, she will, come in distance so that she can have enough distance to pull out before making her sidestep, so that she doesn't have to be backed up against the cage in such a way that she can't move anymore. These little specific things are really fun to watch as well. They're just very difficult to explain as easily as we can, like strategic ideas, but Ringcraft is a tactical skill set as well. And it allows you, knowing how to position yourself relative to your opponent and relative to the cage, and how to use the environment of the cage against them in each exchange, how to make them move one way, how to stop them moving back just at the time you're going to land a punch, or if you're in boxing, how to bounce yourself off the ropes to absorb a shot, how to use the environment is what Ringcraft is, basically. How it's trained, I don't know if there's really anything we can do about that relative to confidence. Ringcraft is just kind of trained by fighting, right? There are specific drills you can do to know your pivots, to know your side steps. But I think Ringcraft does really depend on confidence and discipline, like I said before. Like, that's kind of the thing you need to have before you are going to be a good ring craftsman.
Yeah, I think Ringcraft is not that difficult to train, but rarely is. I think that you need to work it with drills and in sparring. This was something I always tried to emphasize as much as I could, was forward movement, backward movement, sideways movement as you were doing partner drills and doing combinations. Like, very rarely, I think this is a huge weakness in how a lot of people train on the pads and train partner drills, is that they're static.
For sure.
And a fight is never static. You're always trying to move forward, back, to the sides. This is one of the great benefits to me of the Dutch style and the way that it's trained on kind of a basic technical level, is that you're always taking adjustment steps to be sure that your shots move and don't move. So I think that's a huge part of Ringcraft for me, and the way that you train it is just being sure that you're not static when you're doing it, that you're moving into or away from or to the side as you're throwing your combinations. But this is one of the weaknesses of the way that sparring is trained, I think especially in MMA, is that a lot of it's done on an open mat. And you don't fight on an open mat. You fight in a cage or occasionally a ring. You fight in a bounded space. If you don't train in a bounded space, you need to really think hard about how what you're doing plays in the space that you're actually fighting in. So this is like at Jackson's, they do all of their training and sparring in a cage if possible. So anytime they do mitt sessions, they're doing them in the cage so they can think about the space. Anytime they're sparring, they're doing it in the cage so they can think about the space. You need to be able to have those things in mind. You need to be thinking about that.
Specifically, like that, the only thing that changes based on your training environment is how well you will be able to understand the idea of ringcraft. It's the only thing that changes. If you train in an open field, nothing else changes except ringcraft. Because there's nothing to stop you or to stop your opponent moving in a certain direction at any given time. Yeah, I think the cage training, like just having a feel for it, is maybe one of the, like ringcraft may be one of those things that really comes through an experience. I do think you have to train it, you have to understand, and you have to do specific moves. But maybe just having the right training environment is the ultimate basis for understanding ringcraft. It's just having spent a lot of time in a ring or a cage and understanding, like getting used to feeling the fence creeping up behind you, getting used to knowing from having seen it from the other side, now that you've circled around, that the ropes are only 4 feet away from your back. Like these are things you can only really develop through feel, because you don't have the luxury of assessing every move before you make it. You have to know when you're making the move, where you are in the ring.
Exactly. You need to be aware of that. You need to have that drilled into you over and over and over again. And so, like, to come back to Jędrzejczyk real quick, I think that example of the Andrade fight was an example of somebody who has been perfectly trained for that.
Yeah.
She was preternaturally aware of where the cage was. John Jones versus Daniel Cormier, both fights, preternaturally aware of where the fence was relative to his position.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he would know without having to think twice about it, can I stop and throw here, or do I need to move?
Yeah.
Can I stop and throw here, or do I need to move? That's the essence of what ringcraft is about. And conversely, think about somebody like Rafael dos Anjos as a pressure fighter, somebody who's incredibly good at backing his opponents up. His whole game for a long time really depended on the cage. Not quite so much now. I think he's better in open space than he used to be. But for a couple of years, like, he had to back his opponents up. Everything that he did flowed from having the fence to work with. And he got really, really good at understanding where his opponents were and what they would do once he backed them up. So not just how to back them up, but how to exploit their movement and hit them as they moved out, and then how to keep with them and stick with them. He was really good at that.
Yeah.
Still is.
Yeah, I agree. One more thing to say before we wrap up, or maybe one more question to ask. Does Tyron Woodley's approach to using the cage count as ringcraft? I would say yes. And I want to end on the idea that when we talk about ringcraft, you are not talking about a specific correct way of doing things. There are a lot of ways to accomplish a lot of different goals. What you are talking about is using the fighting environment to augment the way in which you fight. Not fighting in a ring, but fighting with a ring, fighting with the cage. And even though Tyron Woodley's style limits him in a lot of ways, backing up into the fence, I think it's fair to call that ringcraft, because it might be an unfaithful ally, but the cage is his ally in a way, in how he backs himself up to plant himself for power counters. So I think ringcraft is very nebulous. That's probably why it's so hard to understand and talk about. But we'll keep an eye out for it, and we'll revisit this topic, because I think there is a lot more to say about ringcraft. But as you guys watch fights with us, keep your eyes out for fighters who use the cage, who use the ring, who make the fighting surface, who make the habitat of the bout an ally of theirs in their game plan and in the exchanges. All right. That's about it for the show. Thank you guys for tuning in. I have been Conor Ruebusch. This has been Patrick Wyman. Before we wrap up, I'm going to give Pat a chance to tell you what he's got coming out this week.
I actually don't think I have anything new coming out this week. If you haven't checked it out already, check out my interview on Tides of History with Dr. Jennifer Raff. We talked about how DNA is transforming our understanding of history, and she's super cool and super smart. She is actually Julie Kedzi's sister, believe it or not.
And she's
which is crazy.
And she's texting you right now.
No. Well, she's super cool and super smart, and it was a really fascinating discussion if you're interested in things like how Neanderthal DNA has made its way into humans, what the effects of that are, and what DNA tells us about past migration patterns and population history, which is like this is literally the cutting edge. She is a world-class expert on these things. You should listen to it if you have any sort of interest in that, and listen to Tides of History in general, because I think I make a pretty fucking good show. Just saying. Yeah,
I think so too. And if you want to hear two people say the word, pronounce it Neanderthal without either of them rolling their eyes, this is probably your only opportunity for that, because we normies don't like that. We don't like that. It's Neanderthal, and it always will be.
Fuck off. Fuck off with you.
As for me, I'm going to do a little bit of a sort of a contextualizing recap of the boxing middle cruiserweight super series that's going on right now. I'm not sure. We haven't talked about this on the show, but it's probably the best thing happening in boxing right now. There is a tournament of 8 fighters, all of whom but one, I think, are ranked in the top 15 of the cruiserweight division, many of them much higher, including such names as Alexander Usyk and Junior Dorticos, and, of course, Dmitry Kudryashov, who Dorticos just fought. But I'm going to write a little piece giving you an idea of what fights have already happened in that tournament, which ones have yet to go or are yet to come in the bracket, and why they matter. Because cruiserweight in boxing is the tits. It is easily one of the best divisions, if not the best division today. And here you have 8 of the very best of that division fighting each other for a trophy. So I'm going to talk about that. That's all I have planned for the week, but that is also all we have planned for today's show. Thank you guys again for tuning in. Catch us on social media if you have any questions. If you want to point out to us any times that you notice Ringcraft or Cagecraft happening in a fight, please feel free to do that. You can find me at BoxingBush on Twitter, BUSCH. Pat is at Patrick_Wyman. And you can also find us both on Facebook, facebook.com/PatrickWymanMMA, facebook.com/Conor Ruebusch MMA. Like, subscribe, all that shit. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.